Fellas, I think you cannot call Khabib Nurmagomedov the greatest of all time, no matter what. I don't care where you're from, if you like him, who you like, I don't care. Khabib cannot be considered the greatest of all time when you factor in everything that makes up a GOAT. And listen, I'm not a Khabib hater. I know there's going to be people flooding my comments immediately from the title, but I do respect him. I definitely think he's in the top 10 greatest of all time. I think he's the greatest lightweight of all time as well, but the #1 greatest martial artist of all time, I definitely don't think it's Khabib, and I'm going to be talking about why in this video, factoring in every factor that makes up the greatest of all time. So let me know your thoughts on Khabib, as a fighter and what he achieved. But the first factor I've got for being the greatest of all time is title defenses. Now, this is really important because not only does it show proof of, a winning streak, but it shows how long you reigned over your division, how dominant were you in your specific division. And yeah, I've just racked up title defenses from all of these fighters, and then look, just compare them. You've got Jon Jones and Demetrious Johnson at 11, you've got Silva at 10, GSP at 9, and then you've got Khabib at 3. 3 is like it's average. I'd say slightly above average compared to the normal champion. But when you're talking about greatest of all time, 3 defenses isn't a lot at all. And I know he didn't lose the belt to anybody. He was only had 3 because he retired. But if we saw Khabib go on for longer and face people like maybe a Charles Oliveira or I don't know, a Michael Chandler, and I'm not saying that he would lose to those people because I do think Khabib would beat an Oliveira, but if we actually saw those people on his resume and it added to his resume and it added to his obviously his title defenses, I think it would be a much more strong argument to call Khabib the GOAT. But 3 defenses, you could times Khabib's title defenses by 3, and it still wouldn't be more than GSP, who's lower than the rest of the greatest of all time. We've got people like Jon Jones, who was ruled over the light heavyweight division for so long. Silva in the middleweight division, he had such a long streak. GSP in the welterweight division as well. Demetrious Johnson at flyweight. Khabib didn't rule for that long. His lightweight legacy was quite short. It was only between a couple of years, and for that reason, I just don't think you can consider him the greatest of all time for that reason. Title defense is one of the most important factors, and Khabib isn't even close compared to the rest. So that's the first reason why I think Khabib, you just can't call him the greatest of all time. The next reason, how many belts in different weight classes? Now, I don't think this is a massive factor. I don't think if you've only got 1 belt, you can't be considered the greatest of all time, but it would definitely push you and boost you to being the greatest of all time. I mean, we've got Jon Jones and GSP who have won a belt in different weight classes. Obviously, we had Jon Jones at light heavyweight and heavyweight, and GSP at welterweight and middleweight, which they both won after a long layoff. And I just think because of that definitely boosts them in the GOAT conversation than Khabib, who again only had the lightweight belt. And I don't think it was I don't think it was a necessity to go to 170, but if Khabib would have gone to 170 and beaten prime Kamaru Usman, I would think Khabib fans would have such a stronger argument for calling Khabib the GOAT. Which he didn't. He didn't have a belt in a different weight class. I don't think it's that important, but it would definitely boost people like Jones and GSP to being the greatest of all time when they've been able to not only take over 1 division, but multiple divisions, because it's not an easy thing to do. We've seen fighters try and fail. We've seen Alexander Volkanovski fail. We've seen Israel Adesanya fail. It's not an easy thing to do to win a belt in a different weight class, and it's usually done after you dominate 1 weight class, and Khabib just never did that. So I don't think it's, it shows that Khabib can't be the greatest of all time, but it definitely boosts people like GSP and Jon Jones. The next factor is, have they never lost a fight? Now, Khabib fans love to bring up the fact that Khabib has never lost a fight, and to be honest, it's impressive. Not losing 1 single fight in the octagon, fair enough, that's impressive. But then again, it really begs the question, neither did Jon Jones. Jones has never lost a fight either. I mean, on paper, technically he has, but it was a disqualification to a fight that he was absolutely dominating. So if we're being real, Jones has never lost a fight either. So they're both on the same page. And then I've also included GSP. Now, GSP has lost twice, so he's not undefeated. He has lost twice, but he has beat both of the opponents that he lost to in the future. So technically, no man has retired after beating GSP and not getting beaten by GSP himself. So yeah, Khabib, he is undefeated, but so is Jon Jones, and I don't even think being undefeated is the strongest case for being the greatest of all time. It shows dominance, but I don't think having 1 or 2 losses on your record shows that you can't be the greatest of all time. I think that's a terrible argument, because I think if you can get a loss like GSP did, if you can lose and then manage to build from that loss and manage to get a win in the future, I think that shows a lot from GSP, and I think that's, a factor that you can include. And I know people are going to bring up the fact that Jones could have lost to Dominic Reyes, but I don't want to be one of these people that just factor in, close fights, because Khabib had close fights as well. He had a close fight against Galatian Tibau, which I can guarantee 90% of Khabib fans have never even watched, because most Khabib fans only joined during the McGregor era. But yeah, Undefeated, very impressive from Khabib, but listen, Jon Jones has never lost either, and GSP, he has lost, but he's beaten both of the opponents in the future. So that's the whole undefeated argument gone out of the way. Next thing, we'll talk about his resume. Now, I don't even think Khabib has the greatest lightweight resume. I think Charles Oliveira has a better lightweight resume than Khabib right now. We've got Khabib with wins over Dustin Poirier, Gaethje, McGregor, Barboza, and Dos Anjos. And to be honest, Barboza wasn't at his absolute prime when he fought Khabib either, so I don't even think that's a strong case, and neither was Dos Anjos. And then we've got Oliveira, where, again, Dustin Poirier and Gaethje, but he's got Beneil Dariush, Michael Chandler. I've included Kevin Lee, and it's also Tony Ferguson. And listen, this was Tony Ferguson when he was at the beginning of his downfall, not at the peak of his downfall, so it's not like he's just beating Ferguson nowadays. But, yeah, Khabib's lightweight resume, it was impressive, but it could have been so much longer. We look at people like Jones and his light heavyweight resume, or GSP and his welterweight resume, and you look at Khabib and the people that he's actually beaten, the notable wins in the lightweight division, and it just doesn't go on that long. There's about 5 notable wins, and if you've got 5 notable wins in the UFC, how can you be considered the greatest of all time? I don't understand how you can be considered the greatest of all time with like 5 notable wins. And yeah, I think even at lightweight, even though he's had a decent resume at lightweight, you could even compare it to Charles Oliveira, who's just absolutely ran through a bunch of contenders. And if he could beat Arman Tsarukyan as well, 100% Charles Oliveira's got a better lightweight resume than Khabib. So when it comes to lightweight pure of all time, I don't even think he's got the best resume at lightweight. Maybe, I'm not saying he's not greater than Charles Oliveira. I'm just saying when it comes down to pure resume in the lightweight division, I'm going to give it to Charles Oliveira over Khabib, especially if he beats Arman Tsarukyan. So that's another thing that brings Khabib down. Completely clean. Now, being clean as an athlete is something that's really important to be on the GOAT list. A lot of Khabib fans love to bring it up. And he was clean, apparently. And I'll talk about why it says apparently in a second. But again, Demetrius Johnson was clean. GSP was clean. What's your argument for them not being the greatest of all time? It's not like Khabib's the only fighter that wasn't doing steroids. When we've got guys like Demetrius Johnson and GSP at the top who also never took steroids. And by the way, Usman Nurmagomedov, he tested positive. He was suspended for testing positive. And listen, I'm not saying because Usman Nurmagomedov did it, that means Khabib did. But I mean, it's definitely suspicious when it's coming from another Dagestani guy in Usman Nurmagomedov. It really begs the question: are the rest of the guys down in Dagestan doing something that we don't know? Who knows? Maybe Khabib was on steroids, and I'm not saying he is. There's no evidence that he was, but I'm just saying it's quite suspicious when Usman Nurmagomedov also tests positive. And yeah, Demetrius Johnson, GSP, again, these guys never tested positive either, so I don't think you can really bring out the argument that Khabib never took steroids for being the greatest of all time, because yeah, fair enough, Jones did on multiple occasions and so did Silva, but Demetrius Johnson, GSP, they had better title defenses and everything than Khabib, and they were also clean. So that's another argument gone out the way for people that want to advocate for Khabib. And then we've got how many generations of champions, or I'll also say fighters, did they beat, Being the greatest of all time, it's about being the greatest actually of all time. And I think I can also critique Anderson Silva on this, because you looked at the later end of Anderson Silva's career, he went on a bit of a fall off as well. So I like considering the actual greatest of all time. Khabib wasn't the greatest in multiple generations. He was the greatest in his kind of 5-year period from like 2018, not even 5-year period, I guess from when he started, when he was on the rise in like 2017, 2018, up until he retired in 2020. So it wasn't even a 5-year period. That was when Khabib was the greatest. When he was the champion, that's when he was the greatest. And that's only when he was the greatest. We didn't get to see what happens after Khabib fought Gaethje. We didn't get to see what happens, after he's fighting for longer than what he was. We never got to see that. He had quite a short resume, and for that reason, he only beat one generation of champions, where we've got guys like Jon Jones, who was fighting these champions when he was 23. He was fighting the first era, or an early era of light heavyweight. He was fighting his era of light heavyweight, and nowadays, he's fighting the future of the heavyweight division in guys like Ciryl Gane. So he's beat 3 generations of champions of Jon Jones, and for me, that really shows that you are the greatest of all time, because you're not just the greatest for one period of time, you're the greatest of actually all time. So GSP, again, 2 generations. Demetrius Johnson, 2 generations, because he's still winning nowadays in ONE FC. Jones, 3. Khabib only beat 1 generation of fighters and champions. So again, another critique for Khabib. And then we've got other dismissed factors that Khabib fans love to bring up as if they have any relevance to being the greatest of all time. The first one we've got is not bleeding. Oh, Khabib never bled. He never cut in the octagon. I don't think that can be a factor for being the greatest of all time. When you're hanging up your achievements on your wall, no one's hanging up the fact that you never bled, because by that logic, Marlon Vera would be, the greatest of all time as well. So it's impressive, but I don't think you can necessarily counter it, you know, bring it in as a factor of being the greatest of all time. And the next one, Khabib barely lost any rounds. Again, that's really impressive, and I guess that can kind of factor to how dominant you were, which we've already talked about. But again, I don't think it's a really strong argument for being the greatest of all time just because you barely lost any rounds. And people that say he's never lost a round before, he's definitely lost rounds. You can argue that he lost rounds against Gleison Tibau, especially against Justin Gaethje as well. Impressive, but we've already talked about dominance and shown that Khabib, maybe he was dominant for a certain period, but maybe not the longest time. So yeah, that is my opinion on Khabib and why I just don't think he can be considered the greatest of all time. Let me know your thoughts on Khabib as a fighter. Do you think he's the GOAT? Personally, I think the greatest of all time is Jon Jones, and then a close second place is GSP, but that's my personal opinion. Let me know your thoughts on Khabib, and thank you for watching.